I want your calls on this now, though. Should we stop expelling boys from school? 0207 862 2222 is the number. A former teacher who's part of a group of Labour MPs urging the government to tackle the issue of toxic masculinity has said he's worried about the rising number of boys being excluded from secondary schools. Jonathan Brash, the member for Hartlepool, questioned why young men are no longer fitting into the education system and raised concerns about what happens when they are, in his words, pushed out. According to a new set of government figures, 1,726 male pupils were excluded from secondary schools in England during the spring term last year. That figure is almost double the amount of female pupils, and it's up 30% on 2022. But is it vital that boys, even disruptive ones, perhaps particularly disruptive ones, that they remain in school to prevent them going down a darker path? I don't know what you think, Kevin. I just remember the important male teachers that I had in my life, and that kind of civilising influence, that a little bit of fear. If you take me away from that, I don't know where I'd be. I'd be lost.
No, look, if you're excluded from school, you tend to going to get worse. And I see it's a dilemma trying to keep discipline in a school so all the other kids can learn. But if a school kicks out a pupil, it's creating a problem elsewhere. It's solved its own problem, but the wider problem is what do you do with that kid? Who's going to deal with that kid? Is it going to go to another school? Private schools kick kids out all the time, and the state sector has to look after them. State schools kick them out. Do they go to a referral unit, a special place, which then just becomes like a school of crime because you put all the kids behaving badly together? It's a real dilemma.
Where do we draw the line then? Because there's one child there, and obviously you have to really concentrate on a kid whose background may be very disrupted already. You're going to ignore them, and then you have the many. You have the school community, the people that might be affected by that.
I think we try and deal with a kid in the school, but you need resources to do that. Sometimes you have to take them out of class. Sometimes they're getting almost one-to-one education, or a few of the kids. There's no easy answer. I understand why heads behave the way they do. Right, let's exclude that kid. There are certain rules and regulations you've got to follow in law, but you can kick them out. But that just creates a problem. It's not poor old troublesome kid. Right, although there's that issue, it's the fact that kid will get worse. If that kid gets worse, it'll create more problems for the other pupils in and out of school.
I mean, obviously, Lin Mei, there are like questions to be asked about why those numbers are up, why there seems to be this problem and exclusions are up. Is it the way the schools are reacting, or is there a problem with young men?
Well, there used to be a lot of expulsions and suspensions, especially within the British black community, but that's actually decreased a lot. So whatever is being done around maybe the black community or youth workers needs to be studied in other areas in Britain when it comes to working class white boys as to why they're not decreasing as well. But I think there's not going to be much dissenting here, because I completely agree. I used to work with youth, especially ones who would be, I don't like to use the word problematic, so I will say challenging. And what that does is the pipeline from expulsion to prison is quite high. So what it's doing is just pushing an issue out onto, and what tends to happen is, unfortunately, when children leave school and they see these ones that haven't gone to school, they get pulled into the attraction of, well, I don't have to go to school anymore. I'm on the street, I'm making money, I'm doing this. And then it kind of drags the ones in school and can often get them going on the same line as the ones that have been expelled.
So at least in school you can monitor it, you can see
just have a different wing. Have a different wing where, like, not people...
A bad boys' room, the porter cabin.
Not a bad boys' room, but maybe just something that assists them. Maybe other people need to, other than teachers, be brought in.
OK, we are going to pause it right there, but don't worry, we have someone that feels very strongly about this lined up. Now let's get straight back to whether we should stop expelling boys from schools. 0207 862 2222 is the number. Before we get to your calls, let's bring in Alun Ebenezer, the head of Caldecott School in Monmouthshire, branded Britain's strictest head teacher. He believes there's been a record number of expulsions under his leadership, something which, Alan, I understand you are quite proud of. Is that right?
Oh, no, I would say I'm proud of it, and I haven't claimed that record. I just think that excluding young people is necessary. I think sometimes you need to exclude in order to include.
OK, can you talk me through that? Exclude in order to include. How does that work?
So if you've got a class of 30 young people and 29 of them want to behave, they want to learn, they don't want to be bullied, they don't want to be subject to antisocial behaviour, and yet there's one young person in that class who is a bully, is displaying antisocial behaviour, is disrupting learning. I would argue that to include the 29, you need to exclude that one young person.
OK. The way Lynn was describing it, the kind of pipeline that goes from school exclusion through to crime to prison, is that something that rings true for you? Is that a sacrifice that you're prepared to make, that somebody could be on the wrong path if it means the 29, the others in the class, are protected from their behaviour?
So I'd love to ask Lynn how she would sort out that one young person who was demonstrating antisocial, disruptive, bullying behaviour. In my career, I've been a head now for I've been teaching for 28 years, been a head for the last 10 or 11 years. I haven't permanently excluded many young people, but I have fixed term exclude a lot of pupils, because you exclude them, you get their parents in, you have restorative conversations. I would argue about 60% of them never reoffend. So I agree, we can't just exclude and then leave them out in the community to do whatever they need to do. But I think that we have to give the message loud and clear that antisocial, disruptive, bullying behaviour will not be tolerated.
Okay, so
I'm interested to know in what your bar is for that, because I'm one of those who was very disruptive. The reason for me being disruptive, my parents were going through a divorce. I wasn't able to see my father, which was, again, very hard on me. So I took it out on being disruptive in the classroom. And I also wasn't good at maths. So I particularly, when in maths, would be disruptive. So I wasn't asked a particular question. I had two really good teachers which took the time to realise, why is Lynn being disruptive? What can we do about that? Can we have... So what, instead of excluding me or, suspending me, they spoke with my parents and put me on internal suspension, if you want to call it that, or a report where
I was a separate part of the school?
Initially, I wasn't, no.
Yeah.
I had been on 2 occasions, but my point is, not to go into too much depth, now that I look back, I'm so appreciative of the 2 teachers and actually a chaplain and my parents for having that holistic approach, as opposed to just get rid of her because she's disrupting the class. Do you take that approach where you do everything in your power, you get external people, maybe social workers or someone else,
deal with it in the school,
to try your best before you go to that result of having to exclude?
Of course. I mean, exclusion is the last resort. Of course it is. But equally, if you've got a young person who you try to internally exclude, so what you've just described there, a young person who's disrupting lessons, we get their mum and dad or their guardian to sit next to them in lessons. That is one of the best things we've done, because I've never had the same parent in twice. So we are constantly thinking of creative ways to stop disruption, to stop antisocial behaviour, to stop defiance. We're thinking about that all the time, but I'm not afraid to exclude, and I will continue to exclude if it gives the message out to everybody else: we will not tolerate antisocial, defiant behaviour. But of course it's the last resort.
OK.
Alan, so that sounds like you have to have that deterrent. You have to have that nuclear option there at the end of that process. Otherwise, the stuff before that doesn't mean anything. Can you stay with us, Alan? Because we're going to take some calls. And I'd love to hear your take on what people have got to say. Liz is in London. Liz, tell us what's happened to you. Is exclusion the right answer, do you think? Was it in your case, if it's relevant?
No, and I'm completely passionate about the opposite, because my son was always a bit wayward. He had a white working class father, and he chose to go to a school called Christ Hospital. He got in because he was bright and he was very, very sporty. And then his father died when he was 14 in a hospital accident. And he ended up in a fight with a sixth former who kind of called his father names. But the school, because it's an independent school, a brilliant school, its motto is an outstanding education that money can't buy. So it has kids from council estates, lots of London kids and so on and so forth. And he was thriving there. He was doing 12 GCSEs. He was learning discipline, everything. You know, he'd learn his prep every night, so many good things. And then all his world fell apart. And they let him go. And I couldn't do anything about it because it wasn't a state school. And he came back grieving, and I didn't know what to do with him. In the end, he went into a pupil referral unit. And he actually said to me after six months, he wasn't allowed to do any more than 3 GCSEs. He said, "Mum, you have to get me out of here, Mum, because I'm smoking dope at lunchtime. I'm at Mackie D's. I like my friends, but I'm just, what's going to happen?" So I got him into a grammar college. I had to get another job to do it. And then I offered him the opportunity to stay there for a sixth form. He got his GCSEs. He got to do more. Brilliant grammar college called Collingham. And then he said, "No, I don't want you to spend any more money." And he got into a girls' state school called Marylebone. Brilliant school where they take boys in the sixth form. And he's a completely different, I mean, they saved him. But he was on the cusp. He was a part of a gang. He came home with a slip T-shirt where someone had tried to knife him, but he was so good at sports, he managed to duck out of the way. He would have been a criminal. And he was lucky because he had me as a mother, and I just wasn't going to give up. But not everyone has that set of circumstances.
Yeah.
So I think that headmaster's just kicking the can down the road.
Okay, Liz.
After these young men.
First off, is your son okay now? Is everything all right now? Is he in a good place in life?
Yes, he's a dog trainer too. You know, he looks after difficult dogs. He's an expert, but he's.
But maybe he needed to move on to different establishments to find the right one to get him to that place. And, you know, the first school was maybe not the right place to deal with him in that moment.
No, it was a brilliant school. Christ, it was like, okay. You know, they wear the white, they wear the yellow socks, they wear the uniform, they march to lunch with a band, and you know, it was exactly what he wanted, a military-like experience. And there's so many young men. Young men are so misunderstood. That's another thing that upsets me.
Okay, thank you, Liz. Listen, I just want to go back to Alan if he's still there. Alan, just that accusation there of kicking the can down the road. Do you keep tabs on those students you have to exclude? Are you able to do that to find out what the result is afterwards?
Of course I do. I don't kick the can down the road. Everybody wants high standards, right? Everyone talks about young people today. Everyone thinks that young people today are not what they should be. Everybody wants it, but to get to that point, we have to take difficult decisions. And so, of course, I track it. I mean, I can say to you, like I said earlier on, 60% of our young people who we exclude once, they never reoffend because it works. You have a reintegration meeting, you talk to their parents, you find out the problem, you sort it out. Of course you do. And then the people who reoffend, you have to come up with more bespoke kind of discipline to sort that out. Yep. But, you know, we can't have our cake and eat it. We can't have a society where young people behave really well, they respect authority, there's no antisocial behaviour, but there's no consequences. Listen, that doesn't exist.
Alan, I don't underestimate the job that you have to do there, and you're taking a line on it, and I really respect what you and teachers, throughout the staff across the country are trying to do to keep kids in school and keep learning. But I have to say we have to leave the debate there. Thanks for all your calls, and thank you to Alun Ebenezer. The best of luck with what you're doing down there in Caldicot.